Welcome everybody. Happy Friday afternoon. Strange times when we find ourselves doing this on Friday afternoon, but I hope you're all well, and your families and your communities too. Thank you for joining us on this session, which I'm going to use current issues, but I'm going to use current issues to justify what I think many schools and many communities have been doing for a long time, and just show that hopefully great curriculums don't need to change dramatically in any circumstances, and to explore a bit what we mean by a great curriculum from my very lovely experience around the world working with bazillions of teachers who have taught me so much. So this session is being recorded. I have to tell you that, so now I've told you that. I'm not quite sure what you do with that information, and I'm not quite sure where the recording goes, but I'm sure to be available for people who want it at any point. So what I'm doing, just share some thoughts and some ideas and thoughts that I'm sure many of you have had, which is why we've come to this session. And using the chat box, as some of you already are, I really, one of my great aims here would be to create a group amongst us all, so that we can take these conversations on and pinch each other's good ideas and share each other's mistakes, and work together to bring the children in our schools together and our communities. But we're going to look at applied learning, how we can apply the learning of curriculum design, how we can get children to apply the learning that they gain from the curriculum, how we can work with our colleagues in schools and in communities to apply the learning of both COVID and the extraordinary global protests that we've benefited from in recent years and months and weeks. And to sort of summarize all that by looking at the efficacious learner. And efficacy was a word that I hadn't really come across until I was really quite old. And I'm sure you will know what it means. But this idea about the extent to which I can affect change. And my strapline here will be that a curriculum and teachers that can affect change to their curriculum, and a curriculum which allows children to change their world, which kind of seems to be the point to me. So, lessons from COVID. This is Felix, suitably phased out. And Felix is a young man who attends one of my favourite schools in the UK, and has a number of issues with school because of his autism, which he manages very well. But and this is a wonderful school, as I said, one of my favourite schools in the UK, does so many great things. And one of the things that they do that's great is they reflect, and they reflected on the fact as a start that this young man seemed to learn far better when he was at home than when he was in school, without the distractions and the anxieties that even a wonderful school causes. And for those of us who are passionate about teaching about making schools great, this seems to me to be quite a salutary thought, that some kids, not all kids, I'm very mindful of that some kids actually did better because they were learning from home. And what does that mean for our curriculum? Does it mean that we can actually explore a curriculum which takes place in any building at any time, wherever the children are happiest? Now, I come from a background of being Mr. Inclusive, and there wasn't any kid in the world that my school wasn't going to be the best place in the world for, and thus I failed many children, I'm sure. So I just want to consider about how broad we're going to take this phrase curriculum, and whether we can actually accept the fact that some children learn better not in our schools, and what we do with that learning. Another observation that I've picked up from teachers is that kids working online, some of those kids have been asking remarkable questions, really specific, acute questions that kind of say, I need to know this now, don't mess me around, tell me now. And what's also interesting is that teachers have there's lots of examples I've come across where teachers have said, okay, I'll tell you now. And they short and sharp and sweet, and they don't do what teachers like me do and rattle on and expand and give examples, and they just answer kids' questions. So I think there's something really interesting here that we're learning from kids using screens at home. And that's the importance of kids' questions. And Are we okay to go on mute? If you can, everyone's happy to go on mute, that would be great. Thank you. There's a lot of work that we've done on teachers' questioning skills. I wonder if there is a part of our curriculum, if we want children to engage and access learning, that we actually teach them to ask really acute, specific, forensic questions that allow us to answer them directly and immediately and let them crack on with their learning. So I think that's an interesting learning that I've picked up from COVID. Another observation, and this is, again, what do we do with this in schools for us to think about and discuss over time, is that some children clearly work better, more happily, more enthusiastically, they engage better, they learn better, because they were working from a menu and they had degrees of choice about how and when they did what. Now, I'm not being naive here. I'm not for a moment assuming that every kid in every school in the country, in the world, can pick and choose when they do stuff. You know? I can't pick and choose really when I go to the doctors or when I do this or when I do that. But it did just make me think about when children are working from a menu, their reason for doing the work seems to change, at least sometimes. They're doing the work now because I want to do it now, and therefore I want this answer now because I'm doing this work and I want to know, as opposed to I'm doing this work for you. So I thought that, what could be, if this is true of your experience, and I'm sure you've had many other learnings over the last few weeks and months, if there is some truth in this, if this is just more than a couple of kids, what can we do in our curriculum that would work well as a menu, and how would we blend that child designated learning with teacher designated learning? What would that look like for a timetable? So just another thought on that. The other thing which has really shocked me, I think, shocked is perhaps too strong a word, intrigued me, is how many teachers have become quite fascinated by AI and the benefits it really can have and what AI can do that teachers can't do. And I think once upon a time I was a bit miffy about it, and then I maybe was a bit threatened by it. But now, and this is a wonderful quote I got some years ago from Junaid Mubin, that AI bridges the gap between personalization and teacher workload. And I know that many of you and many of the teachers I've spoken to are feeding back to me how the AI programs which are now available, and not necessarily across the whole curriculum, but in certain areas, really do allow us to let kids get on with a reactive and responsive piece of software, which does take out some of the work and some of the stress around personalization and the workload that builds. So again, how would we build AI into our curriculums, those of us who are in communities where there is the money and the budget to do such things? And I suppose overriding all these things, both those of us who are adults and kids in school, is this constant cry that I hear for community and belonging and relationships and proximity and indeed appropriate physical contact. And I know that this, I've not been in a school in a country that doesn't know this. I'm not making out it's new, but perhaps we've seen it again very differently. And to consider in our curriculum, to what extent we might choose to design a curriculum which deliberately built on relationships and senses of belonging and senses of community. Didn't just assume it, but actually taught it and sought to make sure that children understood it and knew about it. So I'll come on to that in a bit more detail later. So I'm only painfully aware of just how extraordinarily hard teachers are working at the moment, as always, particularly at this moment, and that workload is only going to increase in September and into the foreseeable future as we explore new territories and new ways of working and new challenges and all sorts of new. Now, I completely understand why some people would therefore, faced with all that challenge, would regress and would go back. And I completely understand that. I'm sure in many areas of my life, I do it too. But there are some schools, and I'm asking the question here, are you fortunate to be in one of those communities where we can take this chaos and take this challenge as the energy for opportunity, And can we? I mean, so many people talk about, oh, we'll never go back, there'll be a new normal, everything will change. And I'm not sure that's true. But are you in a school community? What is the capacity for embracing the change, for embracing the learning from COVID, and to transform our curriculum in the light of the learning that so many of us have benefited from during the protests of recent weeks and months and years? So what is the teacher agency? What is the school agency around curriculum? And do we have a curriculum which develops pupil agency? And I suppose perhaps the cheesy question is, if teachers haven't got agency, are they able to teach it to children? Discuss. Now, what interests me about curriculum and agency around curriculum is there has been a plethora, as a mere choice of 4 here, of curriculums which have quickly been designed by, and I'm sure they're all very good. I haven't studied them in great detail. So many recovery curriculums by another name that people have developed with intention, with the purpose of meeting a need that they've perceived in September, or maybe it's a need that they're meeting now as more and more children return to school. So there is obviously a constituency of teachers and schools who are really interested in designing curriculum for a particular purpose. The particular purpose happens to be recovery or catch up or whatever it might be. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of that, but I'm excited by the fact that we have got teachers in schools who are busy designing a curriculum with a short, medium or long-term purpose in mind, perhaps in ways that we haven't done before, where the curriculum in many schools has sometimes become confused with timetable, and curriculum has sometimes become confused with textbooks, and curriculum sometimes has become confused with exam preparation. And I exaggerate to make a point. I've not been, but to consider what sort of curriculum we really do want, and what sort of curriculum could we offer our children that they wouldn't have to recover from. And I'm playing with the word recovery here, I appreciate that. But you know that old adage that education is everything you remember after you've forgotten everything you were taught? And I know it's a bit of a lazy joke, but and you learn to drive after you've passed the test, all those sorts of slick one-liners that people trot out. But it does seem to me that the evidence from recent protests and evidence from how some children are coping or not thriving when they're away from the classroom is that we don't seem to have a curriculum which works for everybody. And I guess that might be naive, but could we have a curriculum that nobody needs to recover from after they've been through it? And what do we, remember those days where we had records of achievement, but some of the young people that I spoke to, it seemed to be a record of failure. There's the anecdotal evidence, I don't know if it's evidence, anecdotal stories that young people choose A-levels in subjects they haven't yet failed at. I'm not sure that's entirely true, but, well, I've got a 16-year-old who's just made of options, and I've got the example of one. So does the curriculum really meet the needs of all those children? And it certainly hasn't met the needs of some of those children during COVID. So what would we do with our curriculum? What do we really want our curriculum to do? I'm always amazed by a number of schools who have these wonderful vision statements, and yet the curriculum never seems to be aligned to the vision statement. And I know we've now got all these I words from Ofsted. The opportunity we've had over the last few weeks to reflect and to think about the meaning of life or whatever it might be, those of us who've had that time during lockdown, to go back to school and say, what do we really want this curriculum to do for us and for our community and for all the children in our community that our present curriculum may only touch in parts and may irritate to a greater or lesser extent. And for me, I think the better question is, what do we want our children to do with our curriculum? I hope that you've come to this session because you want to do something with your curriculum. And of course, my hope and my intention is that I'm able to give you some questions or some examples or some ideas that help you in that regard. That's the purpose behind my curriculum today, is to help you in your thinking. What do we want the children to do with the curriculum that we give them? Survive it, cover it all, enjoy it? I don't know, all of those things, I'm sure, but think it'd be a really interesting conversation to have in many staff rooms to say, what do we really want our children to do with this curriculum? Kind of, what's the point of it? Now, you can't do a session on curriculum without having at least one picture of postdocs and this idea of delivering a curriculum. And I was working with a school yesterday about whether we really wanted to use the word delivery, or whether we wanted to use the word share, or whether we wanted to use the word gift. We're going to gift our community, our curriculum to our community. And I think there's a piece of work still to be done here about what's the right word when designing curriculum. Is it a curriculum to be enjoyed, a curriculum to be survived, and a curriculum to be delivered, a curriculum to be gifted to our children? There's the curriculum to build a child. I think, I love a Gantt chart, and those of you who know me know I love a Gantt chart, and Gantt charts are used the world round for project management, for building buildings. And what I love about a Gantt chart is how it's ordered and it's sequenced. And if you want to put the windows in May in this building, you have to order them in October before that. So therefore you need to start looking at windows in the February before that, so you can order them in the October so they can be made and delivered on site in the May when the wall's the right height. And when a building works really, really well, the Gantt chart really flies. And it's interesting to work with a couple of schools now on designing their curriculum on a Gantt chart. So if we want a 13-year-old child to be able to do this, what do they need to be able to be doing when they're 6? Now, if you think about the old national curriculum, it seemed to take what we wanted every 16-year-old to know by the age of 16, and we divided it by all the years they were in school, and it ended up with 6-year-olds learning about the planets, which always seemed a bit bizarre to me, that the kids who didn't know their home address knew where Pluto was. But somebody had chunked down the curriculum from 16 and said, therefore you better learn this when you're 5. Now that seems a bit daft to me. But what is it that we could learn about twice, so that by the age of 5, so that when they are 16, they could learn about the planets? Or is 11 the right age? So I'm aware we've got some very learned people on this seminar who will have thought about this in much more detail than me. But I'm particularly interested in how we might, if we've got a clear picture about what we want to build and what we want this child to do with the curriculum, how we might plot that onto a Gantt chart, and depending upon your how much time and how much brain space you've got, what that Gantt chart might look like, and where we might put in information, and where we might get kids to apply it, and where we might add to it. Not in a clumsy way, where 5 times in my daughter's school career, she's done a pizza made to look like a face, but at various levels of carbohydrate knowledge. But not to repeat learning over and over again, but to make sure that we are building on it incrementally in order to build this person that we've defined we want for our world. But I also like the idea of orchestrating a curriculum. Now, I know very little about orchestration, though I do have a friend who's a conductor. And what I've learned from them is that each section of the orchestra practices their bit in a practice room, and they can all play the dots on the lines at the right time, and they've all practiced their instruments, and they're all very talented. And then they come back into the main auditorium when the conductor taps the baton on the lectern. And as my friend said, I always say to them, ladies and gentlemen, you can all play the black dots on the black lines at the right time, but the purpose of this piece of music is to make the audience cry in bar 392. And in order to do that, we don't just all have to play the black dots on the black lines at the right time. We have to orchestrate this music in order to evoke an impact or an emotion, whether that's to dance or to cry or to experience joy, whatever it might be. So how would we orchestrate our curriculum to bring about something above and beyond the sum total of all the constituent parts? And that seems to me what our greatest schools are doing. And I'm sure many of you, I know some for sure, are in those schools right now. But to orchestrate a curriculum where the curriculum is merely the score, and the teachers and the school are the conductors. So what are we trying to achieve with this curriculum? What do we want the child to do with this curriculum? Well, the global employer has said to us that the Sustainable Development Goals are what we need to do as a global society. And it's kind of interesting that having agreed this as a global community, I'm not sure really around the world how many schools have really deeply engaged with producing children who can make the world sustainable. And if that's our biggest challenge, or one of our biggest challenges, we might have thought our curriculum would be directed at doing that. And of course, within that, we want kids who can read, write and count. I'm absolutely go with that one. But what else do we want them to know and be able to do in order to achieve these goals that have been kind of set for us by the world? So are we going to apply our curriculum to the Sustainable Development Goals? Are we going to apply our curriculum to exam answers? And I think some schools and in some classes, we always will. And I'm not, a conversation about exams another day, perhaps. But yeah, there's the old Mick Waters idea, for those of you that know and love and remember Mick, was that maybe, I think it was Mick's idea anyway, and now I've picked him up, that in the early years, we might have a curriculum about me, and then we might move on to a curriculum about my family, and then my community, and then my planet as kids get older, and they're able to abstract if we're going to adopt any sort of Piagetian approaches or any child development frameworks to this. Or are we just going to teach stuff? Because teaching stuff doesn't really seem to have worked, does it? Are we going to teach a curriculum so that children can solve issues about their weight, about their family, about their self-esteem, about their community, about medical conditions, about engineering concerns, social issues? Are we going to design a curriculum so children can access joy or contentment if they're not going to work in the way that we understand work, and they're not going to get their self-esteem from their place in a hierarchical meritocracy or society? What would be the curriculum that would access them to joy or contentment? Are we going to give them a curriculum which they can apply so they are free of bias, free of ignorance, free of fear, free of anxiety, free of oppression, free of ignorance? I don't know. Are we going to design a curriculum that children can leave our schools with, that they can apply to anything they hear and see, the worst of what's been thought and said, so they can understand and pursue truth? So I'm not trying to be esoteric or daft here, but I do think we have to really consider now, in the light of COVID and what the impact that might have on society and the workplace, if curriculum in schools are in part about preparing children for the workplace, in part, and if we take the concerns and the matters raised by the recent protests, which I'm coming on to, we really do want to change our curriculum profoundly and quickly and authentically. So if we're going to apply our curriculum to those issues, then whether that be about joy or about the SDGs or whatever it might be, are we going to get the kids to do a whole bunch of learning, then apply it once every half term? I know some schools do that. They collapse the curriculum, a phase I've never understood, and they take a day out and they tackle a problem, or tackle a challenge. Sometimes they even vertically group across the whole school. Really exciting stuff, seeing some great learning, peer-to-peer learning, all sorts of things, really not knocking it at all. Are we going to do every week? Or we say, well, we've learned a whole bunch of stuff, let's just take half an hour right now and let's take a news item. And how does what we've learned this week impact upon what's happening in your family, in my life, in the world, in the are we going to is every piece of learning going to be an opportunity for teachers to question, well, how does this relate to your understanding? How does this relate to the world that we live in? How does this relate to what you've seen and heard other people say? Are there other ways of seeing and knowing what we've learned this week? And are we going to have a curriculum which is going to give good time and slow pace so that children learn deep, significant schema? Because if you're learning deep, significant schema, would you have to recover after a COVID close down? Or would those schema, in all sorts of ways, have been nurtured and honed and sculpted by the experiences at home, whatever those experiences are, good and bad, though clearly we would wish every child to avoid the bad ones. And do we want, on a weekly basis, I was talking to a school this week that's using COVID to drop assemblies. Don't record that bit. And all the time they're saving from whole school assemblies, they're now going to break down into small groups and get the kids to reflect on the learning of the week, what they want to learn next, but also importantly, to take learning, to take journals and collections of their work from previous years and previous months and previous weeks, and to reflect back on it and say, this is what I learned when I was younger, now I know this to be true. And to have future focused knowledge organisers, not knowledge organisers prepared by a teacher with vocabulary and the rest of it in the core knowledge, and I'm not knocking those, but reflective knowledge organisers where the child is accumulating and showing and connecting and identifying gaps in their knowledge and saying, teach me this because I've got a gap. And that, going back to that idea of the child working from home on the menu, saying, I've got a gap, I need to know this, can you help me now? And so the protests, extraordinary protests that we've been privileged to experience, some of those protests highlight our privilege. Protests that seem to have gained traction in the way that many protests in the past appear not. And of course, these protests, tragically, stand upon the shoulders of previous protests where we haven't learned. And of course, this is the one that I think has shaken us all in so many ways. And I speak as a white, middle-aged, middle-class, tall, white man. And the privilege that have, and the life that I've had because of the colour of my skin at my birth and my gender, and indeed my stature. And what do we learn from these protests that will powerfully and profoundly change our curriculum for all children? Well, what it's highlighted for us all is that white people like me don't know. We don't have the knowledge. Our curriculum has not given us the knowledge. And we have not given the knowledge to many, many communities and many, many groups in our schools. We don't have the knowledge. We have bits of knowledge, and we have the bits of knowledge that we have chosen over history through our bias. Was it history is written by the victor? Interesting. So how can we profoundly change the knowledge that we gift all our children in a meaningful and comprehensible way? And we're going to have to choose, and we can only choose that knowledge in the light of this child we're trying to build, with a consideration for how we want this child to use us. So are we going to teach our children how to be anti-racist? The skills and the techniques of standing up and challenging and calling out and acting. And when we sort out this knowledge curriculum, because this really is a core, a global core knowledge curriculum that we're talking about here, how do we make sure that that knowledge transfers to deep understanding, which will then beget an empathy that demands action? Because that's our challenge as white teachers and white people, particularly our challenge. It's our problem. And let's face it, we pretty much run the school system. I think the evidence there is pretty strong. And it's wonderful Viv Grant put this in the blog this week, which I think it was the Times Ed blog. Right? And this was a call to leaders. And I love these 5 calls. And what I was wondering, and my question to you now, colleagues, is, as well as this being a call to all of us, I was just pondering, I ask you to consider, what would these be like as a set of I can statements for everybody in school, certainly for leadership, but also for all our teachers, but also for all our pupils? Could we design a curriculum, the purpose of which was for every child to be able to say at the end of the course of study, I am willing to listen to the Black community's stories of pain, discrimination and hurt. I am prepared to let down my defences and look at my own unconscious bias. Or maybe these need to be more affirmative. I do. And here's some examples of how I've done it. Could we have a curriculum where the portfolio, or where the exercise book, or whether the attractive display in the corridor is evidence of our children showing how they have taken down their and others' defences to look at unconscious bias. And I'm sure many of you saw the programme last night. In this struggle for racial equality and social justice, what is mine to do? Are we going to have a curriculum which shows and equips and enables and demands and skills children to show what they've done in this struggle to make the world fair and better? Now, if that was our curriculum aspiration and those were the indicators of success, we start to have a very different sort of curriculum. A curriculum which doesn't seek to merely, if you forgive that phrase, merely respond to the latest protest. This is far bigger than that. This is about the transformation of the knowledge base of our curriculum and the intent of our curriculum. And through our experiences of COVID, to think very profoundly and broadly about not going back to normal and how we can ensure that every child learns better in order to create this fair and better world. And there are all sorts of people out there that can help us with this, people far better than me. Many people that I'm privileged to work with, but they're far better than me. And for those of you who want to do your screen grabs or your get your cameras out, now is the next one to, this is the big opportunity, because these are just some of the people that I've had the pleasure and the privilege of talking to and with these last few days and weeks and months, who have taught me so much, and I share with you. I'm not saying that I agree with everything of every one of them. That would be madness, but they certainly sharpen my thinking. They certainly challenge my thinking. I really do encourage you to have a look at big picture learning and what it's trying to do. I've already mentioned Viv Grant, High Tech High in California and their curriculum, fascinating. David Price has got a new book coming out, and David's thinking with always. I've just come across the Black Curriculum Organisation, group of brilliant educators who still are prepared to help people like me. Alison Creel, and I think many of you will hopefully be transferring to Alison's session, which follows shortly after mine. It does some extraordinary work on how to teach anti-racism and not just how to apply an anti-racist policy. Education 2.0, just come across these guys, very excited by what they're doing in trying to do an education for life, through life and learning. Penny Rabinger, extraordinary work. Penny's a great thinker, but also her work with Lifter. So we've talked about artificial intelligence, Lifter virtual realities, and the virtual reality, what do you call it? Scenarios, worlds, the virtual reality worlds that Lifter create. Ashoka, a global organisation that's looking to really be a game changer and to ensure that curriculum does focus on sustainable development goals. The extraordinary Prime Patel and his work on decolonising the curriculum. Extraordinary brain and mind and a huge heart. The British Council, done some fabulous work with the British Council recently on helping children understand truth and false and opinion. And of course, through the British Council, the opportunity we've got to connect children across the world together on shared work around sustainable development goals and getting kids talking to kids and getting kids understanding each other's perceptions and getting kids to argue and challenge each other and share their common humanity. Wonderful organisations like the BAME Network, the Global Majority Network, Diverse Ed. Many of you will be taking part in all sorts of those. And I'm mindful that Rachel's in this group, but the extraordinary work that Rachel and her colleagues are doing in Barrowford School, but also because it's Rachel's birthday today. And despite the fact it's her birthday, she's joined us, for which I thank you, Rachel, as I do for all the learning you've given me over the years. So colleagues, I'm going to wrap up there because I've been told I have to finish 5 minutes early. I hope because I'm a very old white middle-aged middle-class man, I can't do this and look at the chat box at the same time. So I hope that you've been able to put your contact details in there if you wish to, or you've pinched each other's contact details, and And I just want to create this community amongst us all if you wish to be in it, so we can learn better from each other. So at the very least, you've got my email there or my Twitter there. And if you want to contact me, I'll compile the group and I'll, with your permission, put everybody into a group and we'll carry on this conversation. Maybe not over the weekend, because I suspect all of you in school deserve a damn good rest this weekend if you're going to get one. And I hope you do. And thank you very, very much for joining. Take care. Bye-bye.